The movie Truth opens in New York City today. It retraces what happened back in 2004 when 60 Minutes reported that then President George W. Bush had been given special treatment both getting into the National Guard and while he was there. The story is told from the perspective of producer Mary Mapes, who was fired from CBS after she could not validate her own sources. It had the potential to be a bombshell. In the midst of George W. Bush's re-election campaign, CBS News reported that he dodged military service.
60 Minutes has obtained government documents that indicate Mr. Bush may have received preferential treatment in the Guard after not fulfilling his commitments.
But under withering scrutiny about the authenticity of documents used to back up the report, CBS News retracted the story.
It was a mistake. CBS News deeply regrets it.
Within months, 3 high-level executives, producer Mary Mapes and Dan Rather, were fired.
It has been a privilege, and one never taken lightly.
Now in the movie Truth, Rather, played by Robert Redford, and Mapes, played by Cate Blanchett, tell their side of the story.
Do you have these documents?
These really are the holy grail of documents.
Mapes disputes whether the documents were fakes and, regardless, contends the basic story was true.
Our story was about whether the president fulfilled his service. Nobody wants to talk about that. They want to talk about fonts and forgeries. And they hope to God the truth gets lost in the scrum.
For its part, CBS says it's astounding how little truth there is in Truth. But Dan Rather told the New York Times, "I just hope people see the movie and make up their own mind." I know I did. I did. I got to see a press screening of this earlier in the week. I was just overwhelmed at how much I had the same reaction to watching the movie that I had at the time that this thing was unfolding. And that is that more than likely, probably 99% true, they had the story. But they rushed the thing on, and they had documents that were not validated. And it really sunk the whole thing. So they should have either excluded the documents, and then they probably would have felt like they didn't have it. But as you recall, a number of other reporters were working on this story at the same time. I think Walter Robinson was. There was a number of people who, I think they were feeling competitive with them. They wanted to get it on. Meanwhile, this is such a sore subject with CBS. They've banned all advertising. The movie people want, I can't remember who produced it. They want to advertise on all across the networks. CBS accepting no advertising. They're not letting anybody speak about this anywhere except for that one comment from a CBS spokesman. No comments.
This was an old story when they did it. You say that Walter Robinson was working on something at the time, and it's true, but that was a follow-up to his 2000 story, May of 2000. 4 years before this. I have it right here. I mean, in the final 18 months of military service in 1972 and 1973, Bush did not fly at all. He was unaccounted for. This was an old story. The only thing that CBS had that was really new were the documents. And the documents were almost certainly not authentic. At the very least, they have been retyped. And we have no idea why they would have been retyped. So instead of advancing the story, they actually took a story that had been percolating along for a number of years and took it off the table through their own shoddy reporting. I'm not particularly impressed with the thesis of this movie.
Well, it just brought up, I'd like to see the whole thing, but from what I'm reading about it, it brought up all the questions again, and I don't know how to think about it, except, I mean, yes, you're supposed to verify documents. Let me put that on the table, absolutely. But somebody could retype it because they couldn't take the original ones out. I don't know why. I just thought there was more there, and I'm not sure they handled it well, but I guess if you feel that you are right, then maybe you don't act in the savviest way in response to an investigation. Because remember, Mary Mapes had almost a halo around her head. Yes. Everything that she had done.
She had just done Abu Ghraib.
Right. It was just.
Got a Peabody?
She was the golden person in terms of being right on the money with getting the documents and finding the evidence and all of that. So there was a lot of leeway given to both she and he because of that. you know.
I do think it's interesting that we're in a fall season for films now where we're going to have not one but two potential movies about journalism and the acts of journalism, so that's potentially exciting. But it's also Spotlight, the movie about the Globe that's coming out. I also do think it's funny when we see these movies and they're all set to dramatic music. You know, that journalism on Deadline
the music was horrible.
is this sort of dramatic and intense thing when usually you're sitting in front of a computer typing. That set aside, I mean, I do think that we maybe shouldn't be surprised that this movie takes. I haven't seen it, but it certainly seems like it's casting Dan Rather and everyone else in a certain light to sort of say that they tried their best, they did everything they could to sort of, you know, carry the flag forward in the name of journalism. And I guess the best thing you can say, you know, history is written by the winners and movies are produced by people that have the money to produce them, I guess, in this case.
And it came from Mary Mapes' book, right? I mean, which was panned, I think, for some of the same tendencies when it came out back in '05, I believe, that people are, you know, panning the movie for right now. This unwillingness to accept any responsibility for the implosion of this story. She, you know, continues, I guess, to see herself as the victim of sort of a nefarious constellation of, you know, pathetic corporate overlords and nasty right-wing bloggers who are engaged in ad hominem attacks. I mean, to harken back to what Dan was saying, I think it's clear that this story failed because their main pieces of evidence were fatally compromised, and they didn't do their due diligence vetting those pieces of evidence. I mean, I know from, you know, painful personal experience that if you make even a peripheral mistake in a story that you've been working on, it kind of ends up negating the entire story. So if you screw up exhibit A, B, C, and D.
Not to ruin the movie for everybody, but right at the end, there's a dramatic scene where she's before this board, you know, there's like 47 men sort of boring down on her. And they ask her about the letter and was it a fake? And, you know, she doesn't really know. But she said, but then she looks at the guy and she's going like this. But they would have to have known this. They would have to have known that. They would have to know this. They would have to know that. So whoever, if they wrote the letter from scratch and faked it, that was impressive because it referred to people. It referred to departments. It had anonyms. It had this, that, had all the military lingo, and it was signed by this guy Killian. And then the next week, as you recall, 60 Minutes had his secretary on, and she didn't remember typing it. But
here's the part of the argument that Dan Rather's been making for years that I don't get. He says the story was essentially true. Yeah. We knew that. It was not a new story. That's the part that I don't understand why he keeps leaning on that.
Well, and as you said, the fact that they then tried to kind of close the deal with this, you know, the final coup de grace, that's the right way to say it, they ended up making the whole story radioactive because then their screw-up became the story. So they're the ones, it's not, you know, the bad guys on the outside or the bad guys in CBS who suppressed the story. It was them with their errors.
I think the movie's worth a watch.